When learning to snowboard, getting the correct technique is crucial. And I have a ton of videos on snowboarding technique, and I will continue to make many more. But recently I've been heavily researching, as well as experimenting with clients, other ways in which you can streamline the snowboard learning process. So in this video, I want to talk to you about how visualization can be a potent tool for greatly enhancing the speed at which you learn, and then also cementing real-world motor behavior. Now in our case, that motor behavior is of course snowboarding. So today I want to give you a toolbook that you can use to help bring visualization into your riding and to help improve your snowboarding. Now, the first thing to know is visualization or mental training is not as effective as real world training. That is true, it has been shown in a lot of studies. So you may be thinking, well, why then wouldn't I just use real world training? Well, I'd say there are two reasons: risk management and time. So let's take the example of this revert carve. Now, sure, the trick itself doesn't take a very long time, but each time that you want to do that trick, you have to find the right spot on the piece, you have to line it up, and basically your time on the mountain is also limited. Whether you get 1 week a year or 100+ days a year, you want to maximize that time as much as possible so you can use visual training, visualization, when you're not on the mountain, and you can also repeat that task, repeat that movement in your head much quicker than you'll be able to repeat it on the snow. Studies from fMRI brain scans show that the same neural connections in your brain light up when visualizing a task as they do when you complete an actual task. So although I said yes, visual training isn't as effective as real world training, the fact that you can effectively repeat those tasks again and again in your head will then increase the likelihood of success when performing that actual task, which brings me on to point number 2, reducing the risk. Snowboarding is an inherently dangerous activity, so we want to minimize the chances of failure as much as possible. Failure can lead to injury, and injury can lead to downtime. So minimizing the risk is just a no-brainer. So now let's get on to how you can really use visualization to help you progress your snowboarding. Step 1 is to keep it short. The research shows keep your visualization less than 15 seconds long. Now this is perfect for snowboarding, whether you're learning a butter, a trick in the park, or just perfecting an edge change. You want to keep that visualization to less than 15 seconds in duration. Now this shouldn't be a problem unless you're planning on hitting the world's longest rail. All your visualizations should easily stay within that time window. Now you might be thinking, and this is true, that you've heard professional athletes might visualize an entire run, say a whole slopestyle course. But what they're actually going to do is, for instance, visualize rail 1, rail 2, kicker 1, then kicker 2, kicker 3, and they're going to have separate visualizations for each part of the course, and then they're going to stack them together. And that kind of brings me on to the next point, and that is that you want to label your visualizations. Now, this might sound kind of strange, but the studies have shown that if you label a motor movement when visualizing it, so let's say me doing that with my hand, I label that in my head movement 1, and when I actually perform movement 1 in real life, I greatly enhance the neural connections associated with visualizing that task and actually performing that task. Now, relating this to snowboarding, that's pretty easy to do, say in a freestyle setting. Say I want to do a backside 180, in my head it's a backside 180, in the park it's a backside 180. But say I want to get a bit more creative and do a bit of a butter sequence, so I'm going to kind of shifty the board out, kind of almost hold it on the snow, a bit like a front blunt, and then pop it round back forwards, and then kind of use counter rotation to bring my board back around at the end. Now that's a very long label to have stored in my head, so I'm just going to label that in my head, the Lazy Susan. So I've visualized the movement and they're in my head. Now that I'm on snow, all I need to do is think Lazy Susan, and then my brain will fire those same neural pathways that I activated when visualizing it and my chances of success should be far greater. Now, step 3 is how should you actually visualize the task? What should it look like in your head? So let's use the example of a full cab, an easy trick to do on the piste, and I've got a full technical breakdown of how it's done in a separate video that I'll post in the link below. But for this video, how should you actually imagine that in your head? Well, the research shows that you want to imagine it in first person, as though you're actually watching yourself perform the trick. And it's a bit like watching headcam footage of a trick, which for me I found really interesting. And moving forward, knowing that, I now am going to put more headcam footage of tricks and technique to help you guys watch that so you can visualize the trick or the technique itself. Now, all of that might have sounded kind of obvious, but you could, of course, visualize the trick in third person as though you're watching yourself do it. Now, this does work to some extent, but it's been shown to not be nearly as effective as visualizing in the first person. So the really good news for yourself is that you can also watch through old headcam footage that you might have, and that can help you visualize certain parts of your riding that you want to improve upon. So should you visualize with your eyes open or closed? Well, obviously if you're watching footage of yourself, you're going to want to keep your eyes open. But outside of that example, I personally find it much better to keep my eyes closed whilst visualizing a task. It really helps me just block out any distractions, anything else that's going on. So I just want to perform a quick test with you. Close your eyes right now, and I want you to imagine an ornate diamond-covered chandelier hanging down from the ceiling. You got that in your mind? And now I want you to imagine a worm wriggling around on the floor. Okay, so if you did close your eyes and you imagine those things, most of you probably would have darted your eyes upwards to look at the chandelier you're imagining, and also would have put your eyes down to look at the worm. And the research shows that even with our eyes closed, if you replicate the eye movements that you would make when performing a real world task whilst visualizing it, it's going to better cement those neural connections needed to help you better acquire a skill. And a clear example that I find I always use, even before I started researching about visualization or any of this, is every time I go for a backflip, before I'm about to drop in at the top, I close my eyes and I always kind of do that motion, and my eyes kind of roll up towards my forehead as I visualize the backflip and the timing of it coming around and then looking up to spot the landing. Now, I can do the backflip, I know I can do the backflip, but I want to increase my chances of success on the backflip as much as possible, because let's be honest, who wants to do half a backflip? That's going to hurt a little bit. So I use visualization to really help me improve my chances of landing that trick. Which brings me on to step number 4. Visualization and mental training works best for something you can already perform. You don't have to be very good at it, but you can at least somewhat do it. So let's go back to that full cab. Maybe you can kind of pull it around a little bit, but you're not getting much pop, or you're kind of skidding the last part round, or perhaps you're over-rotating at the end when you land. Now, these are the kind of things that visual and mental training can be really helpful with improving. You might really want to visualize getting more pop off that nose to create the spin, or you might want to really just visualize throwing the shoulders around a little bit more to get that last bit of the rotation and not revert it on the piste. But my point is, because visualization works so well for something you can actually do, although today has been slightly more freestyle focused, it actually works really well for helping improve things like your turns. Because unless you're a complete beginner, all of us can turn. And for all of us, whatever your level, I'm sure you can still improve upon your turns as well. A personal example for me is on my heel side turn. I have a bad habit of often holding my arm out here away from my body, particularly when carving more aggressively, which brings us, onto step number 5. Now, when we're looking to improve upon a certain skill, it can be as much about restricting certain movements as it is about improving on other movements. And these are called go and no-go pathways. And yes, again, it's been shown that not just by visualizing the go pathways, but also visualizing the no-go pathways, it can have a really solid impact when you then come to replicate that movement in the real world. So with regards to that heel side turn, when I visualize it, yes, I want to think about things like dipping my center of mass onto the inside of the turn, creating that edge tilt to allow the board to grab in the snow, looking over my lead shoulder for the next edge change. But as much as I want to focus on those things, I also want to visualize that no-go pathway of keeping this back arm down close to my body, and that's going to have real world improvement when I come to then perform my heel side turn. So I'm up on the glacier today. I've just taken the gondola all the way to the top, and I've had to film this video over a couple of days. As you can see, the clouds were starting to roll in yesterday, so I've come back up today. I've switched up my boards, and the last time I rode this board, I was actually with a client who broke their toe strap, so I gave them mine, and now I've just realised that I'm going to be riding all day without a little toe strap on the front. What an absolute plonker. So I want to kind of get to now, when should you actually be visualizing? And personally, it's been something that I've kind of always tended to use on the day. So I talked about that backflip earlier on in the video, and I would literally, before I'm about to go for the backflip, I would shut my eyes, visualize the movements, and then I would go for the task. And this works really well, and you can absolutely do it on the day. Take times like when you're on the gondola. So for instance, today, when I was coming up on the gondola, despite not noticing my toe strap wasn't there, I was actually visualizing these lines and the things that I still need to talk about in this video. But you can also visualize, you know, butter sequences, things like that. Really good time, especially if you're riding on your own, to use that kind of dead time to get better at these movements in your head, and it'll give you a clear idea of what you want to then go out and practice on the piste. But when researching this subject, what I found was super interesting. There've been quite a few studies on injured athletes. Now obviously they're going to get a bit of downtime away from their sport, away from their profession, and these studies have shown that by using visualization during that downtime, athletes are able to come back at the same level that they were at before their injury, even with significant, even up to 6 months of downtime. And this is really great news for us as snowboarders, because obviously it's a seasonal activity and we spend most of the year unable to snowboard. So if you can bring a bit of visualization, and this is where I think the term mental training is slightly more appropriate, if you can bring some mental training into your kind of summer routine, that's going to be really, really effective at keeping you at the same level and really kind of making sure you don't regress. And that has got to be a winner. I found this a fascinating topic, and to be honest, for me it was quite difficult not to make this a much longer video. But if you do want a deeper dive into the subject and to learn about neuroplasticity and things like the connections between the cerebellum and the primary motor cortex, then I can highly recommend a listen to Andrew Huberman's podcast, Huberman Lab. His episode on visualization and mental training collated a lot of the research that essentially became the starting point for me making this video. I'll link it down below, so if you're interested, check it out. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.